I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. What's up, world? Good morning. Welcome to another edition of I Mix What I Like live right here at Black Power Media. I am Jared Ball. Very happy to be here and be hosting. Good morning. Welcome, Grand Rising. Like the ear doctor says, please reach out, tell a friend, tell a friend, tell a friend to get on in, join the program as we again try to hold it down until the Remix Morning Show crew reconvenes tomorrow morning, which is our Monday, to start the week on Tuesday. That's just how we do. Shout out everybody. Good morning, Africans. KD. Good morning, Africans. Ricky. Good morning, Veronica. And shout out to you for producing today's show. Blessed uprising, beautiful people. Razel Bo. Morning, comrades. Comrade P. Morning, family. Caleb B. Good morning, everybody. Sugar Booger. Still got to be one of the coolest names out here. Joe Nathan, good morning. Good Big Teal, good morning. Lisa, James Thompson with the flex. Big Teal, yes, Dr. Paula Seniors will be here in just about an hour. And then after that, we're going to be joined also by Professor Dana Williams at 10 o'clock for a short discussion about anarchy. Somebody I met through academia.edu writes a lot about anarchy, and given, as we'll get to in a little bit, nobody here. My joke is usually, something about your President Biden, but I know that doesn't apply to anybody here. So their President Biden has put out something that smacks at anarchists. And given that I am still trying to learn and catch up to that movement, I thought I would reach out to Professor Williams. So he'll be here just around 10 o'clock our time, Eastern Standard Time. In the meantime, there are a number of stories. Actually, we got kind of busy, got kind of full up. Please do, though, so we have a lot actually to get to, and I'm anxious to share with you all. But please do like, share, subscribe. Join if you can. We are looking to expand again and continue to increase our membership, bring on new shows, bring on new projects. So all of your support goes to that. So please do that. And of course, let everybody know to come on in, retweet, IG, whatever your preference is, email somebody, text somebody, whatever your preference is. Please encourage people to check it out. Join us live if they can. If not, to check it out later on. Please do visit blackpowermedia.org and contact us via the forms there if you want to pitch a show, comment on a program, etc. And of course, if I don't get to it live, or I do come back in the comments a lot. So if there's something that you want to say, like my man Pierre over at Comedy Hype,
put it in the comments,
and we'll try to address it as much as possible. This really, man, I'm not going to get into that. So yesterday, before I get into anything, I want to just thank everybody that reached out to wish me a happy Father's Day. And I want to wish everybody who are fathers themselves or who perform the function of fathers, happy Father's Day. I'm not really big on these holidays. To me, every day should be Father's Day. Every day is Mother's Day. Every day is a birthday. Every day, just whenever. But I am wearing one of my gifts. My youngest, Marley, is named after Bob, and it had nothing to do with the Legend movie or the Daggone Dog movie. But I did put this up. I just want to share with everybody something before we move on, because this is what. First of all, let me do the struggle part first. Let me back up for a quick second. We of course we had a terrible loss in our struggle in our community last week with Brother Abdus. Tomorrow I'll be joining whoever's going to be there at his service tomorrow morning. And so big shout out to Sister Jackie, to the extended BPM, BAP, whoever family, just the people. And I hate that it's around this, but it will be, I do look forward to seeing some folks tomorrow. Anyway, so we'll continue to honor Brother Abdus and Sister Jackie and support and help her. Please do check. At some point I'll find it and bring it back out. But if you or somebody maybe could put it in the chat for the GoFundMe link. It was, it was nice to see that the community came out. The last I checked, they were well on their way to making the $20,000 goal. But please continue to contribute and support, because that unfortunately won't even be enough going forward. So, but anyway. Yeah, please do what you can. Show some love, support, whatever, however. And we wish all the best to Jackie and their family. Anyway, before I get to some of these other stories this over the next hour, and something that I should say that also moved me greatly. It's been an emotional week. Was so years ago in DC. Shout out to Dr. Ayize Sabater, who at the time, I'm not sure honestly if he still works with them. Let me know, Dr. Ayize. He was working with Mommy's TLC. Now, honestly, he and I don't agree on the issue of charter schools. So one day we have to have him on and talk about that. And why he had, anyway, I'll mess with him about that later. This is a good brother, man. We disagree on that, maybe a couple other things, but this is a good dude right here. And I don't even mean to phrase it that way. It's not like despite disagreeing with me, he's a good dude, as if you can't disagree with me and be a good person. I'm just saying. I just acknowledge that even where we have a few disagreements, I really love this brother. And he has showed out and supported all the time. Anyway, years ago while he was working with them, even before my children were born, I would try to support their group, because it was Mommy's TLC was this independent, as I remember it, before and after school program, mostly for it was. I can't remember the details, but obviously mostly for poor Black kids in DC. And he would work with them and teach them all, and bring, do all these programs and all this kind of good stuff. And one of the things that he did that I noticed when I would come around to support or I don't know, I think I tried to give a talk once or twice or something like that. But one of the things that I always remembered, again, even before my own children were born, was that he would to teach children that not just our history, but the radical history. He would create these just simple index cards, put someone we would want people to know on one side and just some basic facts on the other. And I was like, wow, that's more or less basically pretty simple and yet really powerful. So when my children were born, I made a whole bunch of them, these cards. And over the years, they just got lost. And I was always, I'm not gonna lie, I've been kind of bitter, like, because one, I put in a lot of work. And two, you can't just easily replace this stuff. You can't because I had everybody from, everybody, just whoever you would think we would want people to know about. And so, but anyway, but I just wanted them to be around my children, like these ideas and these people. So finally yesterday for Father's Day, one of my gifts was a box of all of these cards. And they remade them like and more, like and better. So it's like Asada, and this is who one of my this is Micaela Bastidas, who is nicknamed Cisa. Was this Cisa or was this Samba? I can't remember, because I nicknamed my daughter Cisa and Samba after these two women. She worked to have Peruvian independence. It was great. Went to war against Spanish rule. She was Tupac Amaru's spouse, but she was a leader of military. She led military campaigns. I mean, she was she was a warrior. Anyway, look at that. Mao. Here we go. This is Cisa, Bartolina Cisa. So I named my oldest after her, nicknamed her Cisa after Bartolina Cisa, who was in Bolivia and also southern Peru and Chile, now Chile. And she fought with her husband in wars against the Spanish. And I think she was also a spouse of Tupac Amaru as well. Like one of the other, like I forgot, there's more than one Tupac Amaru, but anyway. You got Fred Hampton in the joint. You know what I mean? We're going to come back and talk about him. I was like, we're talking about, he's going to be coming up today. I was like, yeah. And it was just perfect timing. So anyway, my man V.I. Lenin, who they say my father was he looked like him, looked like a black Lenin, like a dark skinned version of this guy right here. Anyway, of course you got Brother Malcolm. And it just goes on. I mean, it just goes on. Lolita Lebron, Kwame Ture, you know what I mean? Anyway, and of course, my man, Carl. You got Carl in the building, and Fred. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Ida B. You know what I mean? And I didn't even have my man in the first batch. Bow, Fidel. Anyway, so there's more. I was just very happy about that. That just made my whole day. I got a couple other gifts, but these were the joints right here. Anyway, simple, inexpensive, and a great teaching tool. And it worked because it sunk in. So anyway, very, very happy about that. All right. Shout out to my babies. A couple of things that I saw over the weekend that I wanted to mention just quickly that I think are relevant to a lot of what we're going to be talking about today and just we talk about routinely on this channel. I saw there's a I don't know if it's new. I honestly don't remember. I didn't catch the exact date, but I saw a documentary. I don't know what's going on with the lag. Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on. Tell you I really got it anyway. What could it be? Because the joint is sitting right there. Anyway, I saw this documentary about Hank Paulson, the former Secretary of the Treasury. And I don't want to get into too much about it, but there was just one point that I wanted to bring up that because the documentary is focused on his being involved with the bailout in 07-08, and they go into some of that history. And it's interesting on that note just to get the details from their perspective and to see how the narrative about that history is being recreated by them now. And if you watch the documentary, and if you weren't around at that time, or if you weren't paying attention at that time, or if you don't understand what happened, even just the basics at that time, you can see that what they're doing with the narrative is we couldn't see this coming. It was just a bad thing that happened, and the government had to get involved to bail out these too big to fail institutions. as capitalists, we don't want to do it. We don't like bailing things out. We're philosophically opposed to that, but we just had to do it because it's just one of those things. And also that they couldn't see it coming, which is part of the mythology. And also that they didn't see actors who were involved in creating the bubble of the housing scandal. And if there wasn't already a precedent for people knowing that they would get bailed out if they took wild risks with other people's money and created this huge problem. And one of the points that they mention in here is that that Hank Paulson had worked with Lockheed Martin in the 60s and had helped get that company bailed out. I honestly didn't know this, which I thought was one of the little bits of detail that I thought was interesting. I didn't know Lockheed Martin had needed a bailout in the 60s, in the late 60s. And Paulson at the time, who went from Lockheed to Goldman Sachs, I think, or ended up there. I don't know if there was I can't remember if there was an interim, but he says when he was at Lockheed, he's like, man, we really didn't want to take a bet. Like we don't or he had left Lockheed and was at Goldman and helped with the bail or something like that, because he was trying to say, again, we didn't want to do it. You know, Lockheed should have failed. And he was even, in fact, no, that's right, because he was at Goldman at the time, I think, because he was saying I had argued that Lockheed should have collapsed. And that others, he was saying others, there were plenty of others in the military industrial complex that could have picked up. Oh, wow. You know what, good folks? I thought, hey, it's a happy miscommunication. I thought we had more time. I will just come back to all of this in a little bit. But since Dr. Seniors is here, let's go ahead and not make any ill use of her time. So I will apologize and assume that it was my error. I thought we had a little more time, but that's all good. I'll come back to all this stuff in a little bit. The short of it with the Hank Paulson thing is, and then I'll just wrap it here anyway, is that the claim again is he was saying that others in the military industrial complex, there were plenty of companies that could have picked up the slack, could have picked up all the contracts, that Lockheed should have been left to fail because that's how capitalism is supposed to work. But he had to be convinced, or others were convinced, had convinced him that this was important because they were too big to fail, too big a part of the economy. So they went ahead and bailed them out. And my point in bringing this up is that, again, while we, the poorest, the most oppressed, are constantly told that our economic struggles are our fault or our part of our behavior or our financial illiteracy or our inability to understand the economy. No, the simple issue is we don't have organized political power, which in its simplest sense is the only difference between quote unquote us and them. When they collapsed, they just went to their buddies in Congress, the Senate, and the federal government and got bailed out with quote unquote our tax dollars, billions of dollars, to save their companies so that they can continue creating wars and encouraging wars, profiting off of wars that I and others would get sent to. And that's that. And then, but we're told to go back and start a small business, be wiser with our spending, et cetera, and so forth. We need political power and an organized movement to go get it. Okay. That said, I think it's great that a member of our audience reached out to me and put me in touch, literally and figuratively, in terms of her work, with our next guest, whose forthcoming work I cannot wait to see and have her back on to talk about, because it dovetails with one of my favorite bits of our history that also doesn't get discussed: the Negroes with Guns movement, Mabel and Robert Williams, the Monroe, North Carolina struggle that has inspired so much. But I did not know about the specific woman that our next guest talks about, Mae Mallory. So to talk about her and that history, we are very happy and very fortunate to have with us, joining us now, Dr. Paula Marie Seniors, who is a historian, ethnic studies scholar, and associate professor of Africana Studies at Virginia Tech. She is the biographer of Mae Mallory and the Monroe Defense Committee. Her parents, Audrey Proctor Seniors and Clarence Henry Seniors, founded the Monroe Defense Committee, which bound them together with Mae and Pat Mallory as a family. And the link to her website and more is in the show description below. So please check that out and join me in welcoming Dr. Seniors to the show. Good morning. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you.
Good morning. You know, I could have come back at 9. That's when I told everybody I was coming.
No. All I was doing is going through some nonsense and having fun with some stories. I can come back to that later. That's not a problem at all. We're happy to have you and don't want to waste the opportunity. So thank you very much and good morning.
Good morning.
Again, as I said, I'm very happy that Sister Veronica put us in touch. And I'm just getting introduced to your work and very excited to learn more. If you would just lay it out for us,
okay,
as much as you'd like. Let's get into Monroe Defense, the Williams, Mae Mallory. Who is she? Anyway, please go ahead.
All right. So in 1961, African-American working class self-defense advocate Mae Mallory traveled from New York to Monroe, North Carolina to provide support and arms for the Negroes with Guns movement. She was accused of kidnapping a Ku Klux Klan couple, and she spent a little over 2 years in a Cleveland jail facing extradition. So African-American women radical activists, Mrs. Ethel Azalea Johnson, who was born in 1916 of the Negroes with Guns movement, my adopted grandmother, my mother, Audrey Proctor Seniors, who was born in 1940 of the band New Orleans National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, Ruthie Stone of the Workers' World Party, the Trotskyist Workers' World Party. They all founded the Monroe Defense Committee to support Mae. My father, Clarence Henry Seniors, who was born in 1936 of the Socialist Workers' Party, who joined the Workers' World Party, joined them. And 16-year-old Pat Mallory, Mae's daughter, also got involved in the Monroe Defense Committee to free her mother from jail. So these women emerged as organic intellectuals and bonded permanently as family. I give you their ages because despite the generational differences, they found common bond in Cubanismo, Maoism, Trotskyism, Black nationalism, African socialism. And despite their age differences, they bonded as such. So in the 1970s and 1980s, Pat and Mae went to Tanzania to participate in that socialist revolution. My mother, Audrey Proctor Seniors, went to Grenada and Nicaragua for those socialist revolutions, and Mrs. Johnson advocated for world revolutions from Monroe, North Carolina in her newsletter, Did You Know? So, you know, what led them to participate in world revolutions? Mrs. Johnson was a beautifully brown-skinned Black woman. She was born in Abbeville, South Carolina on January 31st, 1916. And Abbeville, or what some people call Promised Land, played a pivotal role in Johnson's political and intellectual growth. And it informed her self-defense ideology. The people from Abbeville, the Black people, came from soldier stock from Sierra Leone, Gambia, Angola, and Senegal. And they participated in extreme militaristic and intellectual resistance to white supremacist violence and suppression. So for example, in 1848, 3 African-American slaves killed their owners, and they remained resolutely unrepentant, even while going to their death at the end of a hangman's noose. Quote, "They regard themselves as martyrs in the cause of liberty and cheerfully died to better the condition of the other 100 plus Blacks on their plantation." And so these Blacks in Abbeville defied death itself. And so I call it Abbeville's African-American historical community of struggle and resistance. So Mrs. Johnson moved to Monroe. She married. And in 1959, she became the secretary, the vice president, and founding member of the Negroes with Guns movement with Robert F. Williams and Dr. Perry. When Williams left for Cuba, which we'll get into, she became the president for a short period of time of the Negroes with Guns movement. So the Negroes with Guns movement was founded on several different events. One of them was the kissing case, in which some white little girls accused some black boys of kissing them, and their mother demanded that they be jailed. I just looked at the file on that, and it's horrible. They had criminalized these little boys from the age of 6, like 5 or 6. And so they ended up going to reform school, but nobody would touch their case except for the Monroe Negroes with Guns movement. The NAACP, the national NAACP, as well as North Carolina's NAACP would not touch it. So Robert F. Williams, Mrs. Johnson, Dr. Perry, Woodrow Wilson III, I just met Woodrow Wilson III, his father and his grandfather were actively involved in all of the cases in Monroe. And it became an international case, right? The second 2 incidents that led to the formation of the Negroes with Guns movement were the rape of 2 black women in Monroe. And again, nobody would touch the cases. And with these 2 rapes, the black women of Monroe said, we will not take this anymore. And they demanded that the NAACP use arms. So they all started using arms. And we have to understand that these people came from Robert F. Williams and Dr. Perry and many others, Mr. Woodrow Wilson. They came from the military. So they were very trained, right? And so the neighborhood, as soon as they started carrying arms, the Klan backed off. They used to go back and forth in the black community terrorizing them. But as soon as they started carrying arms, they backed off. So that was the founding of the Negroes with Guns movement. And so,
Dr. Seniors, can I stop and interrupt to ask just 2 quick questions?
Yes.
One, can you quickly summarize the origins? Because if I understand this story, if I remember correctly, it's to me it's a funny story. The origin of the name Negroes with Guns is the name of the organization. And
you better tell me, because that's one thing I have not.
Well, I'm getting this, if memory serves, and that should be checked, is that from the Freedom Archives audio documentary on Robert and Mabel. If I remember correctly, initially when Robert and his crew just brought the guns out to show that they were prepared to self-defend, by the way, which they said led to peace. Like, to your point, when the Klan showed up and saw it wasn't just going to be a one-way, monopoly of violence, they left. So it kept the peace. But they said that there was some white man that saw them with the guns and was like, what are these Negroes with guns? So Robert was like, he said, you know what? That's a good name for the group, or somebody took that. Anyway, so I thought that was funny.
Thank you.
Anyway,
I studied so much. I didn't study that, the origin of the name. So thank you for that.
No worries. Yeah. Anyway, please. Sorry for the interruption. Go ahead.
Oh, no, please. So, So anyway, Mrs. Ethel Azalea Johnson pronounced that the only alternative Black people have left a self-defense policy. And so as the founding member and chairman of Philadelphia's Revolutionary Action Movement and the writer and publisher of The Crusader, that was the Negroes with Guns movement newspaper, and Did You Know, which came after the Negroes with Crusader, she published the Did You Know with My Parents. And she used her Abbeville's historical community of struggle and resistance ideology in her activism. Okay, so that's just a brief on Mrs. Johnson. Also, just another brief on her. Her mother influenced her greatly in terms of her ideology. Her mother taught them, her children, about slavery. She taught them that they must fight for other people. She said that her mother planted the seeds of discontent in her children, discontent with any and everything inhumane. She told her children, never rest contented until all men are free. And so this is the ideology that Mrs. Johnson had. And she said that her mother was free, living as a free person in her heart, but she was never really free because she was a washerwoman and she worked very hard. But she instilled these strong self-defense, help other people ideologies into her children. So through Mrs. Johnson's writing, she connected Monroe's Black poverty to Cuban poverty during the Batista reign. And she modeled what was called the Crusaders Association for Relief and Enlightenment after Cuban revolutionary initiatives. So in 1963, with the help of my parents, the Crusaders, or CARE, they're very sardonic. They have a good sense of humor. CARE offered food, clothing, shoes, a food garden, and enlightenment to Monroe's African American community. And we just have to know, I'll just note that this predates the 1970 Black Panthers free breakfast program, because the state, North Carolina, refused to help Black people in any way, right? Now, during times of great stress, Mrs. Johnson would go to Philadelphia, which was Abbeville's sister city, and she and 19-year-old Max Stanford, co-founded and chaired the Revolutionary Action Movement. And so Johnson charged colonized diasporic youth to lead world revolutions. And in 1963, she wrote about RAM's response to police attacks on African-American demonstrators picketing for jobs. She said, many Afro-Americans, after witnessing the attacks on their relatives and friends on the picket lines, left the demonstration, but returned with 45s and straight razors, end quote. And so this offers us a window into her self-defense ideology and her influence on RAM's combat-ready youth. Now, she did not get to go to Cuba. She didn't get to go to Nicaragua or Grenada, but she participated in war revolutions through her writing. So this is a lovely quote she wrote about international struggles. Long live the great leaders of the international liberation struggles. Long live the people of the international liberation struggles. May the eyes of the people on the local front be open and their ears unstopped, so that they may hear the roar of world revolutions and do what must be done. For the strength of the organized masses is invincible. So she's a pretty strong woman,
Clearly.
Yes. So what happened? How did all of these people come together? So the national branch of the NAACP, the Freedom Riders, Martin Luther King, and others sent the Freedom Riders to Monroe in August 1961 to teach them the effectiveness of passive resistance. Now, this is really interesting because they had just been beaten, several times, the Freedom Riders, but they're going to teach the Monroe people the effectiveness of passive resistance by sending the Freedom Riders down. So the Negroes with Guns movement members called on their friends for physical support. And so Mae Mallory, who was born in Macon, Georgia in 1930, answered the call and traveled with the writer Julian Mayfield with weapons from her Harlem Crusaders family fundraisers, and also a Harlem gangster who gave her 2 submachine guns, right? So Robert F. Williams, Mrs. Johnson, and Dr. Perry told them, do not march. They told the Freedom Riders, do not march on Sunday. but they're going to teach them the effectiveness of passive resistance. So Sunday, August 27, 1961, 5,000 armed Ku Klux Klan and police viciously attacked the demonstrators, invaded the heavily militarized and armed Black community, and a Ku Klux Klan couple, the Steagles, they drove through, they couldn't get out. So they pushed their way into Williams' home. Williams and Mae Mallory and Julian Mayfield, who are all staying with them, left, protected them because the African American community was furious and they wanted to kill these Klansmen and women. And so the Steagles ended up leaving unharmed. But Mae recounted that Chief Mounty, quote, threatened to have us all hanging by our heels within 30 minutes. And they charged them all with kidnapping, the Steagles.
Dr. Seniors, I'm sorry. I just want to get clear. And forgive me, I'm just now catching that you because we have a Dr. CBS, we have a Dr. Jab, and then I'm catching that we have Dr. PMS, which is funny to me. I'm seeing, I'm just now noticing that on your name. Anyway, I just want to make sure I'm clear. So the Freedom Riders come down to march. The Monroe Defense Committee, Negroes with Guns Committee, says, do not do this.
Right.
This is not a good idea.
Right.
You don't understand the situation here. This is, and maybe even if I may add a little bit, this isn't our preferred method of dealing with this problem.
Absolutely.
But the Freedom Riders, because it doesn't work. And the Freedom Riders say, hold on, we know better.
Right.
So we're going to teach you about your own situation.
Right.
And they come down there, do it anyway.
Right.
The Klan is outnumbered and armed and start to attack the Freedom Riders. But when they invade the Black community that is itself heavily armed, in my understanding that things don't go as planned for the Klan.
Right.
And their plan breaks up, and this white couple who have initially come in to invade this Black community are now being saved by Williams, Mallory, and Mayfield. And then the three Black saviors, so to speak, are then charged with kidnapping this couple, this invading Klan couple who they are actually protecting.
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure I'm following the story and that we're all following the story, because I mean, it sounds perfectly consistent with this country, but I just want to make sure we're clear because it doesn't sound consistent with logic. Right. But anyway, go ahead. I just wanted to, okay. So
they leave unharmed, and they, with the call from Chief Mounty, they all leave Monroe. Williams abandons Mae in New York City, and he and his family make their way to Canada and eventually to Cuba.
Abandoned?
Yes, sir.
Like, that sounds hostile and negative. Did something happen?
They had different ideologies in terms of they had different ideologies in terms of the self-defense ideology. They had different, they clashed. Mae
Mallory and Robert Williams.
Yeah, Mae has a huge personality. Okay, and so they clashed. And so during the whole melee in Monroe, they were not getting along as well as we would have liked them to.
What did she want to have happen?
Well, they just had different ideologies in terms of self-defense. And so we see this as they go on through the years, that between COINTELPRO, him being in Cuba and she being in New York or in Cleveland where she's jailed, there's getting counter information, misinformation is being sent back and forth between them. And so this is the beginning of their clash. Yes. This is
so COINTELPRO, you're saying, is helping interfere with their communication?
Yes. When Mae is in jail and Robert Williams is in Ohio. I mean in Cuba. Yeah. Cuba. Yeah, Cuba.
Okay. All right. Yeah. All right.
So yes, he abandons Mae. He and his family successfully make their way to Cuba. Julian Mayfield goes to Ghana. She says that as soon as she saw that they were all accused of kidnapping this Ku Klux Klan couple, that she left New York for Cleveland. And she says that as soon as the FBI, the Secret Service people, knew that he was in Cuba while she was hiding in Cleveland, she said they rained down upon her so fast and picked her up so fast and put her in jail so fast that she was surprised they didn't leave any of their agents behind. So she ends up in a Cleveland jail for it, on and off for a good 2 years, right? So let me tell you who Mae is. So Mae was born in 1926. She comes from farmer stock in Macon, Georgia. And she develops a self-defense ideology at the age of 3 while living with her cousins, Tempia, in Macon. A white female store owner, Mrs. Saloon, offered Black children maggot-filled cheese. Mallory says, quote, "I slapped that garbage out of her hands and she slapped me and I ran home crying. And so this cousin made me explain to her why I was crying. And somehow or another, I just told my cousin that the little girl hit me. And so she told me to go back. And even if Mary Saloon had crawled up her mother's dress to go back and hit her, or I wasn't coming in the house. So I went back there, you see, and I went back there and I popped her. And then I ran home." And so Mrs. Saloon called the police, who came to the house looking for, quote, "this little nigger who had hit a white woman." And so Cousin Tempia castigated them. She said, "You white people are so stupid. You mean you had to have 15 motorcycle cops come for this?" And she held up, this little black brown ball of flesh that I was. And she said, Tempia said, "Now don't you look ridiculous?" Mallory said she really made them feel a fool. So they told her that she would have to teach me to respect white people. And Tempia told them, "You have to learn to respect us." So they had to leave Macon. Nothing happened to them in a state in which lynching was number one. And they lynched children too, right? And so they left Georgia, Mallory recalled, soon after the incident for Brooklyn, because she said, "My mother could see I wasn't going to make it so good in the South." So they left. And so Mae Mallory had the first, do you want to ask me any questions before I move forward?
Oh, no.
Okay.
Please, I'll happily interrupt whenever I'm ready. It's all good.
Okay, thank you. So in Brooklyn, Mae wanted to be a scholar. But the public schools and her family orchestrated other ideas for her. Her family arranged a marriage. She had an arranged marriage at 17 and 2 children by, 18 and 19. And she said, now I love babies, but I think there is something else in life besides having a baby and rearing it. And so she said, I left him with children in tow. So she worked in factories and she chose a life of learning, political activism, fighting to desegregate the New York City public schools on Pat's behalf. So she was the first person to bring a desegregation case for the New York City schools. And she found agency with the Negroes with Guns movement. She said she had gone to the Black nationalists. She said initially she had gone to the communists, but she said that she didn't feel comfortable with the communists because every time Black women would come with their husbands or boyfriends, the white women would take their boyfriends. And so she did not feel alliance with the communists.
or specifically the white women communists?
She didn't have alliance with none of them. So she also said that when she was working her union job, when she got fired, she was speaking communism, support of communism in her union job. And this was right at the time of the Hungarian Revolution. And so she said they didn't come to her aid, but they gave all the jobs, the union jobs, to the new Hungarian immigrants. So between that and then, going to the Communist Party and losing their boyfriend, she just did not align with the communists. She said she went to the Black nationalists, and she said the Black nationalists, they were not very respectful to Black women, so she didn't find allegiance with them. And so she said the only group that she really found allegiance was with the Negroes with Guns movement. So she founded the Harlem Crusader family to support Robert F. Williams and fundraisers with Yuri Kuchiyama and many, many others. Sylvester Leaks, who was the editor of The Messenger. I can't remember the name of the historian. But anyway, they all came together and they would have fundraisers with Max Roach and Abby Lincoln to buy arms for the Negroes with Guns movement. But right now, she's in jail. Right? She's in jail in Cleveland. So what happened? What happened with Mae, right? So the Monroe Defense Committee, upon Mae's arrest, there were three organizations founded. There was the Committee to Aid the Monroe Defendants, which was the organization founded by the Socialist Workers' Party. There was the Monroe Defense Committee in New York City with Calvin Hicks and others. And then there was the Monroe Defense Committee in New York City, which was aligned with the Workers' World, the Trotskyist Workers' World Party. The other two groups, the New York Monroe Defense Committee and the Committee to Aid Monroe Defendants, they disbanded. So upon Mae's arrest in 1961, the Cleveland Monroe Defense Committee, quote, a group with a way out philosophy on self-defense against mobsters, led by my mother, Audrey Proctor Seniors, Ruthie Stone, Mrs. Johnson, my father, and the Workers' World Party came to Mae's aid. So who was my mother? She was born in New Orleans in 1940, and in 1958, she joined the Negroes, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And she said, my first involvement in the area of social and political change began in New Orleans in 1950s. Along with a number of my peers, I became a card-carrying member of the NAACP, which was a very radical thing to do. And it was extremely radical because the NAACP had been surveilled by the FBI since the 1940s. And in 1956, the FBI, as well as the people in New Orleans, made membership of the NAACP illegal. So my mother, Audrey Proctor Seniors, became an unrepentant and unapologetic socialist and communist, a follower of Paul Robeson, who she named me after, my parents named me after him, a lifelong advocate of unions, living wages, fair and decent working conditions, and affordable housing. So at the age of 21, she moved to Cleveland, Ohio, became an organic intellectual analyzing Lenin, Marx, and First World Revolutionary theory, supported Third World revolutions and the Negroes with Guns movement, and joined the Monroe Defense Committee as the office manager. She joined the Workers' World, the Youth Against War and Fascism, and met my father, Clarence Henry Seniors, a student initially at Morehouse who got kicked out because of his political activism and who eventually graduated from Morris Brown University. And he would become the chairman of the Monroe Defense Committee. So in 1964, the extradition battle was lost. And so Mae Mallory they all moved to Monroe, North Carolina to fight for Mae Mallory. So my mother went on in the late 80s, the 1984 to 1987. She worked as a brigadista in Nicaragua, picking coffee for the Sandinistas. She had first gone to Grenada, but with the Grenadian Revolution, that was thwarted. So she organized several organizations with people in New York for in protest of the United States Grenadian invasion. So in 1984, as a member of a brigadista going to Nicaragua to pick coffee for the Sandinistas, she met the mothers of heroes and martyrs. And my mother relayed her encounter with one of the women whose daughters perished at the hands of the Contras in her essay called In Brigadista Harvest, a book. So she said, quote, "The mother asked us to tell the mothers in the United States not to let their sons come to invade Nicaragua. We know what it is like to lose a child, and we do not wish that to happen to anyone. If your sons come here to invade us, they will be killed." Now, many times since, my mother said, I have reflected on these words and what they mean for Black and Latino mothers and families here. History has shown in Vietnam and most recently in Grenada that it is Blacks and the poor who are fighting on the front lines for the United States dirty wars. Black mothers must bury their sons, and all of us suffer the emotional and economic hardship of their loss to our community. Now, I believe that my mother felt insurmountable anguish and further committed herself to transforming the U.S. system of exploitation by recruiting Third World brigades to go to Nicaragua to pick coffees for the Sandinistas. And so she gave interviews, speaking to African American organizations and writing articles. So the final woman, girl actually, in this group was Pat Mallory. And she was born in 1945. And the 1957 school desegregation case left Pat, who was 12 years old, blacklisted at school. A mother in jail for initiating the desegregation case. So Mae was jailed in New York for initiating the desegregation case. And Pat was confused and devastated. But after this difficult childhood, Pat arose like a phoenix and a Black nationalist rebel girl. That's what I call her, a Black nationalist rebel girl at Seward Park High School. She says, quote, "I considered myself a Black nationalist since a teenager. We got very Afrocentric. We got our African names and the beads representing one god or another. And that was it. When I decided to go natural, Abby Lincoln, in fact, did my hair. I hung out with Mama Kekas at Harlem Yoruba Temple. And so she became involved with the Negro Culture Club in her school, the Multiracial Anti-Nuclear War Symposium Club, because she said, because we were not trying to prepare for war. And she attended Black nationalist activities. She attended the Miss Natural Beauty Contest, the Grandassa Models fashion shows, the Nation of Islam's Temple No. 7, listening to Malcolm and verbally sparring with the boxer Muhammad Ali. Oh, he was such a loudmouth. And as a Black nationalist rebel girl, she chose radical activism and advocated for change. So Pat ended up going to SUNY Stony Brook, where she and the other students demanded a Black dorm and founded a Black Studies department. And this actually predated Cornell University. She received her master's degree from New York University, and in 1971 moved to Tanzania to join that revolution. And Tanzania gained independence from Britain in 1961, and they adopted Ujamaa, African socialism, and invited African Americans to help build the country. The United States also sent strategically placed African American CIA agents. Now, Pat recalled to me, I had to go because of what it promised to be. It was an adventure, and I believed in African socialism. So she went to Tanzania after getting her degree from New York University, and she taught in the Maryknoll Missionary Schools, girls' school, which in 1969 had been taken over by the Tanzanian government. So in 1969, she taught English, language composition, and Latin. She said, I asked her how else she participated in the revolution, and she said, I just lived a life as a school teacher, supporting the government in that way, and not taking expatriate salary, being paid local wages like everyone else. So she was just having a beautiful time in Tanzania, but Pat says, my mother was dying to get to Tanzania, and I was the vehicle to get there. So in February 1972, Mae did what any self-possessed African-American radical woman would do when rejecting oppressive systems. She quit her nurse's aide job, left the post office, no forwarding address, skipped paying her phone bill, and as any true African-American woman revolutionary leaving the US to join an African revolution would do, she skipped out on her rent. Now, I asked Pat if she had done the same, and she said, oh no, I paid my bills. My mother, she was a gangster. So Pat says, I knew my mother and grandmother were coming. I didn't know when they were coming. So Pat enjoyed her life in Tanzania, having adventures. She said, quote, I met this young man who was an area commissioner, but he was slick. Anyway, he showed me around. I was getting ready for our date, and this taxi is coming up. I'm looking, and I see this cab coming down the road, stopping in front of my door. Out comes Mae Mallory and my grandmother. Oh my gosh, the jig was up. They messed my thing up. But Pat, in her independent woman splendor, maintained her composure and her plans. And she and the young man went out. Pat says that when she returned from the date, my mother and grandmother talked themselves a blue streak. And you don't know anything about this person. And so that was it. They were in Tanzania. Now, Pat indicates that her independence did take a hit with Mae and her grandmother's arrival, but she continued to live an independent life without her in Tanzania. So these African-American radical women activists, Ethel Azalea Johnson, Mae Mallory, Audrey Proctor Seniors, and Pat Mallory created family cemented by resistance under state repression and surveillance. They raged, and in their raging, they accomplished amazing and extraordinary things.
That is, I cannot wait. Thank you. I cannot wait for the book. Obviously, the book is going to be off the chain. So I have at least just a few questions. One from the chat. Could it have been Dr. John Henrik Clarke, who was the historian?
That's who I was trying to.
That's right.
I couldn't get it. It was in my head, and I couldn't.
Yeah. Shout out to man. I forgot who came up with. I had a similar thought, but I can't take credit for it. And I'm now. I think it was Will Guzman. Yeah. Will Guzman had that. Yeah. Well done. Oh,
thank you, Mr. Guzman.
But having done my own thesis on Dr. Clarke, I thought that sounded like that might have been him. I mean, Black women can't catch a break in this struggle. Is that a theme? I mean, I made that note when you're talking about, in the communist struggle, the white women take their men, and in the nationalist struggle, they're demeaned under patriarchy. So what is there to do? Pick up guns and become international. That's how I heard it. I don't know if that was the message you meant to convey, but that's what I heard. I don't know. I'll just leave that out there. That's just
I like
version.
that. Dr.
Okay,
Bell, I like that one.
All right. But I did want to ask about someone else mentioned this in the chat, that first of all, they mentioned Akinyele Umoja's We Will Shoot Back. And I encourage people to go to imixwhatilike.org to hear our previous interviews with him on that. You mentioned someone else that was mentioned in the chat, Charlie Cobb, and his book, This Nonviolent Stuff Will Get You Killed. Yes. And the point that I thought that you pulled out that I thought was very interesting was that in the intro that you shared with me is that we understand that there's this nonviolent movement, but that shouldn't be misunderstood to suggest that everybody in it was at a grand level philosophically peaceful. So you point out that Dr. King, I forgot how you described, but he had an arsenal in his house.
Yes.
I'm always remembering, for all that they talk about Du Bois during the Atlanta riots, there's the story of him getting on in 1896, I think, when he gets out on his front lawn with a shotgun and it says the first white man to step on my lawn is getting shot.
Right.
Like we forget that part of this history. So
it's not palatable. It's not palatable, right? If you're going to tell a history, right? It's more palatable that the Black people just rolled over and took whippings, right?
Or that the only method, and this is what I loved about your story, or that the only method is to peacefully go and get beaten and get your head knocked in by the Klan.
Yeah.
That's not all. That wasn't what propelled everything forward, or at least not by itself. That there is this parallel history that I love that you're drawing out of. That was always, people, when for all the focus in Eyes on the Prize of people marching in wherever in the South, there were the deacons and off on the side with shotguns and rifles. I mean, but they don't get the camera attention, or they don't get the focus as much as everything else. So I did want to ask you about both that and that internationalism piece. I mean, you obviously make it clear, but you talk about the forays, with Grenada, Venezuela, Cuba, how did, for Mae and these other women, how did internationalism come into play? Where did they get encouraged in that direction, or what else can you say about how they messed with that idea of internationalism?
From what Pat has said, they always had an international ideology. Mae had gone to Ghana previously. She had met Robert F. Williams in Tanzania previously before they moved. They lived there for 10 years before they moved there. These people didn't see the oppression as Black people and people of color in the United States as just here. They saw it as, imperialism, colonialism overseas as well. And so they always had an international bent to them, right? So for example, my parents' library, we have books on Lenin. We have the Little Red Book, Mao's Little Red Book. Books on Lenin, books on Cuba. My parents always had an international bent, right? And so my mother, went to Grenada. She had every intention of staying in Grenada and helping with that revolution. But with the U.S. invasion, they, deliberately destroyed a very peaceful, beautiful thing, right? And so she and her friends formed an organization to argue against the U.S. Suppression of that revolution, and then went to Nicaragua for that socialist revolution. We were involved. My mother went to Namibia to observe when they gained their freedom from South Africa. They always, and being that they were involved with, the Workers' World Party, the Youth Against War and Fascism, all of them were very much against the Vietnam War and wars against people of color overseas. So they always had that. And, as Pat said, she became a Black nationalist as a young person. influenced by her mother, but she gained her own, ideology. And so she wanted to go to Tanzania. She initially, Pat went to Guyana, right? And she went to Guyana with an organization. And then she went to Tanzania. She went to Tanzania twice, once as a student at SUNY Stony Brook, and then once to live there permanently. Yeah.
Wow, right on.
Yeah.
And is there anything else you could say about this split with Rob on armed self-defense? I'm very interested to hear anything more you would want to say, share with us about that. I mean, what was the issue? Like,
they just, they both believed in self-defense. Mm-hmm. They both believed, that, this was the only way to go. They were, you have to ask my father exactly what happened. Mm-hmm. But evidently they were fighting. They were fighting. They were not getting along before the riot. Mm. And so I guess him being angry with her, he just abandoned her in New York. Mae says that, gosh, in some of her writing, she said, gosh, Robert, you got to go to Cuba. I got stuck here, and in that you hear the lament from Mae that, she would have very willingly gone to Cuba. I don't know what would have happened to her kids. She had 2 kids, but she would have very willingly gone. And so in all of her correspondence with Williams, she's talking about going to Cuba, going to Tanzania, going to Ghana. She would have gone, but he left her. And then, the Yuri Kuchiyama writes a letter to Robert F. Williams, because at one point he sends this very scathing account about Mae to his Crusader, the people who get the Crusader newspaper. And so Yuri says, was that the FBI that did that? Was that the CIA? I can't imagine that you would accuse Mae of being a spy. And so in the correspondence, you see that there are times where he accused Mae of being a spy. Mae, on the other hand, is always in support of Robert F. Williams. She's like, learn as much as you can, and then you can come back and you can lead the revolution. But there was this friction, this terror. And I mean, the only thing you can account it for is the COINTELPRO, because he talks about being in Cuba and the white communists just undercutting him every step of the way. And they probably were FBI informants, right? These white communists that were there. So there was this disinformation program, this misinformation program that was in place. So they were always in friction. When
she and he, because he lives until 96, so which is a lot later than many often remember. So they never sat down and got straight. They never.
When she said that, when in the 70s, when she went to Tanzania, she said she wrote to him, and saying, well, we can straighten, we can talk about, what is going on when I get to Tanzania. She in the letter says that, now that you're in China, and then she's begging him to take her kids. Can you get my children to be educated in Cuba? Then when he gets to China, she's like, can you take my kids to be educated in China? And when he's in China, she's like, well, you could come back and teach all this Chinese Maoism to the children, like all our Black kids, right? And so she's always, from the letters, always looking at what he can do when he comes back. And he gets mad with her at some point because she says that, you should not come back right away because it's a hot mess here, right? And even her lawyer, And
this would have been, we're talking about
like the late 60s to the early 70s, the late 60s to the early 70s. There's no extent, at least in the archives, I haven't seen any letters from after the 70s.
Okay.
So those are the letters.
When did she pass?
She passed she passed after my mother. She passed in the 2000s.
Oh wow.
Yeah, she passed after my mom. My mother died in 95.
Okay.
And so her and Pat joined a radical church in New York, right? And they were very much involved, continued to be until she died. Mae and Pat continued with the church.
So when is the book supposed to come out?
So remember I told you, so I finished it about the day, I think the day after you emailed me, and the editor said that it should be finally approved in August. So I would think that it will come out 6 months after August. So I believe, I hope, I pray that it will come out in February of 2022. Yeah.
All right. So at the latest, if not before then, we'll definitely have you back then after, because as soon I'm pre-ordering it as soon as I can. And
University of Georgia Press.
Yeah, congratulations on that too. University press publication is important, and I know not just easily come by. So congratulations on that.
Yeah, I mean, I've been working. Oh my gosh. So what happened was Dr. Carol Boyce Davies, Dr.
Shout
Gloria
out to Dr. CBD. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Dr. Gloria Dickinson, my friends from school, Dr. Denise De Silva, Dr. Sandra Angeleri. They all over the years, you have to write about this. You have to write about this. This is not a norm, an average upbringing that you had. They were like, you have to write it. So it's taken a long time, to write. And I've been to all the archives around the United States.
Right on.
Yeah.
Well, we put the link to your website in the description below. And if there's anything else you want to leave with us, please do. Otherwise, again, I'm very grateful. Shout out again to Veronica for linking us up. And I can't wait to get into more of this work. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And I want to thank you very much, Dr. Ball, for inviting me, and my friend Veronica for telling you about me. She's such
absolutely. By the way, quickly, do you have time to answer this question real quick about Mae Mallory's relationship with the World Party, World Party, and the Youth Against War and Fascism?
Yeah, so those are the Workers' World Party was part of the Monroe Defense Committee. And so she, Pat, while Mae was in jail, was very much involved with the Workers' World Party. And as I said, with us, with my parents, with the Monroe Defense Committee. For some reason, in her writing and in her interviews, Mae does not at all mention the Workers' World Party, but they were very much, they were instrumental in getting her out of jail and preventing her from being, going to jail for this kidnapping.
Okay.
Yeah, and the Workers' World Party, I believe, was founded in 1959. They broke off from the Socialist Workers' World Party, and they were Trotskyists, and then they also became Maoist.
Okay. All right. Well, Dr. PMS, Dr. Paula Marie Seniors, thank you very much again for joining us. I can't wait to have you back and to have, after having read the book. Thank you for lifting up these stories. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Anytime. Take good care.
You too. Thank you.
All right, everybody. I'm going to take a quick break and then come back and get to some more of these stories. Thanks again to Dr. Paula Marie Seniors. That was a fantastic conversation. I look forward to getting more into her work and having her back. Going to take a quick break and then get into some more of these stories before Professor Dana Williams comes on in about 45 minutes or so for a relatively quick conversation about Joe Biden and anarchy. So don't go anywhere. Just back in just a quick second here at I Mix What I Like Live, Black Power Media. Peace. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. I like, what I like, what I like. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. What I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. All right, back again here at I Mix What I Like. Yeah, that was dope. Big shout out to Dr. PMS, and thanks again to Veronica for setting that up. And I love the sort of BPM collective crew production of the program. So definitely hit us up. If you want to suggest guests, especially if you're familiar with their work, and especially even more if you have a line to them. Because I don't have a staff. Maybe we need to work on that. Maybe I need to get an intern or something. I don't know. Maybe we can start. By the way, actually, the more who can like, share, subscribe, and join, the more that is a likelihood. And then who knows what can happen. But yeah, but definitely if you have, because it's not always easy to chase, produce, and to get everybody that you want to get. So anyway, so I mentioned the Hank Paulson documentary that I'm watching, and the Lockheed Martin bailout. I think it was 1967, and political power being a necessity here. I also watched this documentary, I think new to another streaming service, about Robert F. Kennedy, which I thought was very interesting, if for no other reason that it in telling his story, obviously to praise the Kennedys and to follow that general narrative that they were all great and whatever, but they mention the struggle that he had with Dr. King earlier on, and in surveilling King and all of that. They do mention that, but also equally importantly, I thought it was interesting that they acknowledge I didn't write it down, but there's a sister in there that sort of led the charge, a lawyer who led the charge in looking into this, or who's at least credited with this documentary. They look into some of the criticism I've seen over the years of that the claim that Sirhan was the killer, including going over the evidence that I thought was most compelling in its challenge of that narrative, that the medical examiner said the bullet had to have been fired at very close range, and no one saw Sirhan closer than a few feet, meaning he couldn't have been close enough to have pulled off that shot, plus the others. You forget that other people were shot that day as well. So I thought that was interesting that they at least mentioned that. and that there was even discussion of the brainwashing of Sirhan. Sirhan, you even hear the audio tapes where it's clear that he's being led to his confession by the interviewers. It was pretty interesting. All right, so that was that. So another thing, that was really all I had on that. Another thing that I did see that I would like to share, especially, and this is a special shout out to my we gotta support them and then push them left crew, which I don't actually think watch this show, but so I saw this first. I'll give him credit to Jimmy Dore. I'm gonna come back to talk about him in a minute, but he referenced this tweet here from Mae Mallory and this video. I just would like us to check out this video real quick.
People who are fleeing murder capitals of the world. There are children who are fleeing murder capitals of the world, who have fled, most of them, murder capitals of the world. We have families that are fleeing murder capitals of the world. A mother who pays a coyote. Imagine a mother who makes a decision to pay a coyote.
She did have her routine down.
When a mother pays a coyote, often through a caravan with a coyote even, to transport her child through their country of origin, through the entire country of Mexico, of traveling through the entire country of Mexico, to transport her child across the entire country of Mexico, through the entire country of Mexico. It was safer for them to take that trek through Mexico, facing unknown peril, facing unknown peril, facing unknown peril in what they know could be a perilous journey. We have always presented ourselves as being a nation of strength with strong arms, the strong arms of America. Part of the strength of our nation is supposed to be that we have strong arms, that when people are fleeing harm, we will embrace them, which will embrace and protect anyone fleeing or facing harm. Should be here to receive anyone who is fleeing harm.
Yeah, she got his grip.
I want to be clear to folks in this region who are thinking about making that dangerous trek to the United States-Mexico border. Do not come. Do not come.
But what does Donald Trump do? But what does this president do? He virtually looks at those children and says, go back to where you came from. Not to flick them away and say, go back to where you came from. And that's the kind of policy we've had from this administration. He says, go back to where you came from. That is not reflective of our America and our values, and it's got to end.
And I believe if you come to our border, you will be turned back. If you come to our border, you will be turned back.
Anyway, oh, who hit that? Who hit that? Who hit that? There it is. That's it. That's it. You got to know your Urugu. Again, I see some of the comments. Listen, first of all, Jimmy Dore did a great segment on a recent appearance by Jon Stewart on Stephen Colbert. And I actually I have this to talk about anyway. So yes, Jimmy is a more left Jon Stewart. The reason I watch this stuff is because, again, I do not watch anymore MSNBC, CNN, almost never, very, very infrequently, because I can't take, because I want news, but I can't take just the incredible, really conservatism. Really, the liberals are conservative and conservatives are like full-blown reactionary, but the patriotism, the liberalism, the false narratives, I'm only going to be critical of Republicans and Donald Trump types, and still Donald Trump, even though it's June of the following year past his election or his loss. we're not going to be critical of the Democrats. We're not going to be, even who was it? The Washington Post or them took away the lie tracker of the president, even though Biden is lying at record paces. All of that, I can't take all of that. So when I want regular news, I've come to like the Jimmy Dore show. I think he's funny. It's a well-produced show. They put effort into it, and he's at least left of the Democratic Party and makes fun of the Democratic Party. I'm not looking to him for analysis, and as I'm going to get to in a minute, I'm going to show you exactly why. But I used to watch The Daily Show with Jon Stewart for the same reason, except I thought he was just even too liberal and soft. I thought the Colbert Report was a funny criticism, and I think Jimmy Dore is right that when you watch Stephen Colbert on CBS, he is literally performing the guy. He is literally performing in reality the version of himself that he made fun of as a comic sarcastically on the Colbert Report. I mean, it's crazy. So I might as well, I'll just use this as a segue to what I was going to get to anyway with this, and come back to the other stuff. Because so anyway, I watch all of them just to because Jimmy Dore covers regular news. He tells you what is the New York Times and the Washington Post are saying. He tells you what MSNBC is saying. And lately he's been telling me a lot and us a lot about what the Young Turks have been saying. Now, I have never watched the Young Turks in their entire career. I've never understood the phenomenon. I never paid attention to them. So I've only heard of them in this recent beef between Jimmy Dore and so much of the white progressive left and the Young Turks, which for me speaks to a larger issue here. So as I'm starting with, I'm saying I like the Jimmy Dore show. I like that I can tune in and get some comedy, and they make fun of the news of the day, but there are extreme limits to what the Jimmy Dore show can do. So I don't look for it to do beyond that. So in the same way, again, that many people will just tune into CNN or just have it on and just to get the basic news, not necessarily loving the host or following the analysis of the host, but just to get the news. That's how I watch Jimmy Dore. That's how I watch The Gray Zone. That's how I watch, Richard Medhurst. That's how I watch, who else? I guess that's pretty much it for like the routine, if I'm not mistaken, that's not coming out of the Black media world. I think that's it. I mean, the Gray Zone incorporates Pushback with Aaron Mate. They got the Ben Norton reports and Max Blumenthal and Anya Parampil, and I mean that's I think the core crew. And Anya was just on with Jimmy Dore making fun of the Young Turks, which was hilarious and informative. But anyway. But when I watch, so lately they've been just having this beef with Cenk Uygur and what's her name, Anna Kasparian, the two main hosts, I think, of the Young Turks. And Jimmy Dore used to work with them, and they've been, he's been exposing for a long time that they're basically take $20 million from Katzenberg and the Democratic Party establishment. So they become, supporters of the Democratic Party, and they only criticize the Republicans, and they don't do any honest reporting. Now they're cussing at Aaron Mate and claiming that he's being paid by the Russians in his coverage of Syria. They're doing all this kind of stuff. And apparently from the clips I've seen, their reporting is horrible. Their analysis is horrible. Their behavior is horrible. They're hypocrites. They're a mess. They're all that I would predict. And by the way, my man, my man 50 grand from back in the day, Kamon Freeman. Remember my man? You tried to get me on that panel. You told me to come be on a panel with them. At Busboys and Poets in DC. And I show up and I find out, I wasn't really supposed to be on a panel. I was supposed to be like a valued respondent. And I sat there, and Cenk and somebody were on stage. I don't think it wasn't her, somebody else. And I sat there for like 10 minutes and dipped. I was like, there's no way. And I told you, Simone, I reached out. It was like, how? I was like, my man, how dare you disrespect me by putting me, I'm going to be second fiddle to this? I think that's actually how I approached him too. I mean, I was on, you know, it probably sounded horrible, but really I was like, what is this? They don't have an analysis. They're silly. They're Democratic Party hacks. This is not me. I was like, you should have known better. So I just left. Anyway, so to see years later that this is where they are, I was like, wow, like, I mean, anyway, so in all of this, the back and forth, they're cussing at each other, making fun of each other. A couple of things become very clear to me. One, I've been right all along that there is value to the white left press, but there are extreme limitations. And as so many historically have pointed out, this traditional struggle between Black liberation and white liberalism is just made plain as they start to expand beyond the news coverage and reveal some things about themselves personally and politically. It's just all very clear, the limitations. So for instance, when many of them admit in their conversations, like I think Aaron Mate and Jimmy Dore have, that their so-called radicalism really occurred around the failures of the Obama administration. Like that was one, it was a reminder both in terms of my age, but also political. You know, Jimmy's closer to my age, I think, if not older. The trajectory politically, like you all are brand new to the so-called left. Like, not that, you know, it was just a nice reminder, like, damn, really? Like Obama? But it's telling, which is also, again, why they will talk a little bit about Julian Assange as this keynote political prisoner, but either have no awareness or willingness to talk about Mumia, Mutulu, Asada, Sundiata, Leonard, even David Gilmour, even the white ones they don't talk about. And it's like, so you have real limitations, both in terms of the timeline, but also the political limitations, because they do all this wonderful reporting on Venezuela and Nicaragua and Syria. I mean, you know, all of that stuff, Russiagate. I mean, Aaron Mate, you know, showed me that the details of how Russiagate is some nonsense just by reading his, not that he showed me, but I mean, just reading his work. The Duma, the OPCW scandal. Yeah, shout out to my colleague, Piers Robinson. But Aaron Mate did, you know, I mean, I've learned a lot about the nonsense with that and what's going on with Syria from their report. But when it comes to radical responses to the problems here in the United States, you know, there's this tremendous blind spot that I can only think is willful at this point. Which is why I think it's interesting that they praise, like Jimmy Dore will praise Crystal Ball and Sagar, what's his name, for their new show and their work, even as he has to make fun of them for maintaining a friendship with the journalist Ryan Grimm from The Intercept, who he exposes routinely and hilariously as a hack, a Democratic Party Biden supporting hack who's supposed to be at this alternative space called The Intercept. But again, if Crystal Ball and Kendall, whatever his name, if their radicalism, so-called, if their criticism is born out of the failures of Obama, they're brand new and again radically politically limited. So the information is good. I enjoy some of the programming, but this is again why I've wanted to do the work that I do and why I've wanted to help build this BPM alternative, because it's not that you need me to tell you this. It's not that I'm breaking news here, but it's just another reminder that we have a really difficult media and particularly news media environment to deal with. And the Black one, which I sort of addressed indirectly in the Buying Power book, but I want to continue to do more with, and we've made fun of a little bit with the Roland Martin stuff. Like that is a real problem. Like, so when people have hit me up and they've made fun, like you watch Jimmy Dore, why don't you get these Black alternatives? As one person in the YouTube comments noted, I said, well, what Black alternatives that do daily or routine, like mainstream news coverage that is left of the Democratic Party. Where are they? And every single person that this person mentioned in the chat, in the comment, is already associated with BPM, which is, again, my point. They were like, well, what about burning down Kim Brown? What about the Black Miss podcast? What about Luke Ma Nation? Rest in peace, Baba Abdus. What about, and I'm like, they all already, are you not paying attention? So this is not some, anyway. So, but in watching all of this lately, that is the beef with TYT, the Young Turks. And the funniest line, though, for me is when I think it was Anya pointed out that how you going to be Anna Kasparian and Armenian co-hosting a show called the Young Turks? Like, that says everything about your politics. I don't think Anya said this, but it would really be like, you know, a Black person being on a show called the Young Slave Masters, or a Jew being on a program called the Young Nazis. You say the Turks genocide your people, and you over there talking. Anyway, I was like, wow, I had not caught that, but that was funny. Anyway, I don't watch the show, so, but not that we needed it, but again, I have found this clip right here is all the proof you need, if not that we needed it, of the limitations of our dear brother Jimmy Dore. Because in a very funny bit where he's talking about because he's talking about a recent speech where Joe Biden is foolishly making a point that you know, he says something like, I don't understand how people could, you know, compare the United States to Russia or other countries that interfere with other people's elections. We don't do that here in the United States. So Jimmy Dore is making fun of the fact that, of course, that's a lie, that the United States has routinely and quite often, probably more than anybody, interfered in people's elections and overthrowing their government. So he's showing you a list here of all the governments that have been overthrown by the United States. But this part is, for me, the funniest, because it's so much evidence of the intellectual, the non-Black intellectual world that he comes out of, which is why, you know, he only might know of Cornel West, who's going to be on our show Friday morning. And I cannot wait to ask Dr. West, how you going to have a podcast with Trisha Rose? And how you going to have all these people? How you going to have DeRay McKesson on there, man? How you going to have all these other people on there? Where the leftists, where the radicals on the program, man? So we're going to ask Dr. West about that on Friday, among some other things. I look forward to that conversation. I appreciate him coming through. But Jimmy only knows Dr. West. He knows Justin Jackson, the NFL football player, who's now a left liberal YouTube host. He might know, I think that's it. Like all of them. Katie Halper has her one Black co-host on Thursday nights. Cool brother, nice brother. But none of the discussion emanates out of these traditions of Black struggles or histories. Like, they don't know, like, they have a very Breonna Gray Joy, maybe they might, you know, interview because she was with Bernie Sanders, you know, Nina Turner, because she was with Bernie. She's now in Ohio running. So, like, that's the extent. But Black radicalism, they don't know. But here's this I thought was so funny. And I was like, this is evidence, if we ever needed it, that Jimmy needs help with his limitations. So check this out.
South Yemen, Suriname, and even again another country I never heard of. Fiji.
Hold on, wait, I gotta back it up. He's listed the countries. Listen.
Seychelles again twice.
Wait, I missed it. Hold on, I thought I had it.
Cambodia, Laos, Ecuador, the Congo, France, Brazil, Dominican Republic, Cuba, Bolivia, Indonesia, Ghana, Chile, Greece, Costa Rica, Bolivia, Australia. In what Australia? I didn't know that. Angola, Zaire, Portugal, Jamaica. I can't even pronounce that country. Seychelles. Hold on. Seychelles again, twice.
Seychelles again. I don't mean to make, I'm just saying, it's not a popularly, you know, discussed country. but Seychelles. Okay. All right. Okay, Jimmy. Seychelles. All right, hold on. It's not done. It's not done. Hold up.
Way. Chad, Grenada, South Yemen, Suriname, and even again another country I never heard of. Fiji.
Suriname. Hold up, son. Come on, son.
A country I never heard of. Fiji, Libya, Nicaragua, Panama, Bulgaria, Albania, Iraq again in 1991. Afghanistan, heard of. Fiji, Libya, Nicaragua, Panama.
There's so many countries.
Seychelles again twice, once in 1779. Way. Chad, Grenada, South Yemen, Suriname, and even again another country I never heard of. Fiji, Libya.
You can even listen to Bob Marley and Jimmy Cliff and learn about the importance of Suriname to the African world, to blackness. He said Suriname. Anyway, so that's what I'm saying. That's the proof right there. That's it. Suriname and Seychelles. That's why we know that there are limitations to even, because the segment is great. The segment is hilarious, and he's exposing Biden. He's making fun of all the horrible history of all. Look at all of those overthrows of governments that this country has been involved in. But anyway, that's why we have to be around doing what we do, because as he points out, he's thankful that MSNBC and CNN have moved so far to the right because it leaves lane for him. We're so happy that in his expansive show and reach that he can't cover the black world nearly at all in nearly the way we would be able to do it. So shout out to Suriname and the Seychelles. Seychelles. All right. Okay. A couple more things before our next guest gets here to talk a little bit about anarchy. Let's see. Where was I? So did you all see this one? Speaking of Kamala, Nina Simone's family blasts Kamala Harris, saying that she barred them from access to their estate. VP Kamala Harris was once AG, Attorney General Kamala Harris, and it was during that time that she ripped Nina Simone's family from her estate. So claims the late singer's own flesh and blood. The Veep is under fire by Nina Simone's daughter and granddaughter, Lisa Simone Kelly and Rihanna Simone Kelly, respectively, for what they say was Kamala's role in deciding how Nina's estate is now managed, and more importantly, who's managing it or not. So they start by talking about how Chloe Bailey covered the song Feeling Good, and how Chloe Bailey was getting apparently dragged on Twitter for making it too sexual and this, that, and the third. So Nina's family wanted to remind everybody that Nina was herself. Let's see. Rihanna defended Chloe by saying everyone's coming at Chloe Bailey for her performance of my grandmother Nina Simone's song Feeling Good. But what y'all don't understand is that grandma was a free-spirited woman herself. She would have loved the performance as much as I do. Relax. So from there, Chloe seemed to appreciate the shout out, but things took a hard left turn as someone asked Rihanna in her comments why her family would create a Twitter account for her grandmother, who passed away in 2003. That set off a long stream of bashing. Rihanna wrote this in response: Nina's granddaughter here. My family doesn't run her estate anymore. It was taken away from us and given to white people. Our family name was dragged in the media. We get no royalties, nothing. Want to hold someone accountable? Ask Kamala Harris why she came from my family. Hashtag Nina Simone. You could check out the rest of the thread yourself to get to the nitty gritty, but essentially Rihanna blames Kamala for barring her fam from access to Nina's estate, not to mention rights to her image, likeness, royalties, creative decisions with the IP and everything else, intellectual property. Rihanna says Kamala and co gave all powers to white people, and she feels her heritage and ties to her grandmother have virtually disappeared, all because of what Kamala's office decided when they were overseeing the state charity case back in 2013. Rihanna's mother, Lisa, was administrator of Nina's estate upon death, but sometime later she was accused of misappropriating funds that were tied to both the estate and a charity set up in Nina's name. That's how Kamala's office got involved, and in the end, they reached a settlement, the terms of which Rihanna is shedding light on now, not to mention Lisa herself, who praised her daughter for speaking her truth. Part of the settlement was Lisa was prohibited from associating herself with Nina in what seems to be any capacity, be it familial or otherwise, in addition to a de facto gag order forbidding her from talking about Nina. That's why Rihanna is speaking up on the issue. Anyway, so I just thought that was interesting. For me, what's most interesting about that story, not just that Kamala is involved, playing her role for the state, but that, again, as has been said a lot, you're worth more to the industry dead than alive. And intellectual property is a huge industry, one of the biggest in the world and in this country. And most popular artists don't own their art, and the money that is generated by their talent does not get redistributed to anyone outside of the industry, with very few exceptions. And this is, for me, historically been part of my argument that exposes the colonial relationship. This is exactly how colonization works. Where, again, Fanon pointed out, you don't kill the culture of the colonized, you ossify it in a colonial form that testifies against its own people. So that's why I'm sure why we would end up with a film starring, what's her name, is Nina Simone, that just looked horrible. Because the owners of the estate are the ones looking to benefit and capture revenue off of the name, and couldn't care less about the accuracy or the quality. But anyway, so I just thought that was quite interesting. Another one real quick, I want to get to two other stories real quick. I thought that are actually consistent with where we were with our first guest and where we're going with our next. But this story here reports in a single week on governments in South Sudan, Bangladesh, and Mexico using spyware from Israeli companies to target human rights defenders, journalists, and political opponents. Israel field tests technology of repression on Palestinians and exports them worldwide. BDS, boycott, divest, and sanctions movement against Israel, which I support, although I continue to sort of more broadly speaking from my buying power argument, boycotts, I get the intent, and historically what people have said about Montgomery or even anti-apartheid struggles, but if we look at the outcomes of both of those examples, what we need is political power. Palestinians need political power, and as long as so to whatever extent BDS will work, support it, but mostly I just wanted to bring out this story that Israeli technologies and philosophy and politics are impacting a lot of the world, including world majority parts of the world, even in the newly formed South Sudan, which is, I don't know, a little eerie, spooky, given what had been the hopes for that movement among, I know, some of us. So that was one story I wanted to raise very quickly. And then one other one was this one here, which I thought was very interesting. Shout out to Malika Cambone on Twitter for putting me onto this one. Singer, Taylor, Soldier, Spy. I actually like that movie, by the way, Tinker Tailor, Soldier, Spy, where they're playing on the title here about British intelligence, which is a CIA officer's life as the frontman of one of Uganda's top bands. So it's a fascinating story that came out at the end of last year, apparently. But what I think is interesting about it is that they don't talk about anything that this singer is said to have done for the CIA. They just let you know that he was working for the CIA while a member of one of Uganda's top bands. Let's see. Daryl M. Blocker, a Berkeley College music trained guitarist, and his band, the Kampala Jazz All-Stars, trekked all over East Africa, and it turns out he was working for the CIA. And Blocker knew how to connect with the audience in Soroti because that's how the CIA trains all of its operations officers, clandestine agents who work undercover to gather intelligence. So they just talk. It's an ABC News article. So they don't say it's a negative. They don't tell us what he was doing or what intelligence he was looking to gather. They just talk about him being this vocalist singer who becomes an agent, talking about the art of espionage, intimate in the sense, if you're truly paying attention and listening to whoever's sitting across from you, they'll know it and they will know that you're sincere. What I also thought was interesting about this ABC News story is that not only about the point about the CIA using popular culture for surveillance and intelligence gathering, but that once you quote unquote retire, you could just go ahead and work for commercial news. So 32 years in the intelligence community clearly prepares you to become an ABC News contributor. And that was it. That was really it. Because again, they don't talk about what he was doing or what his operations were, just that he was in fact a spy who used his role as a singer. And then I thought again about what John Potash said on our show the other day about the function of celebrity and artists, that to his point, that one of their functions is not only to, in my own small amount of work, my argument has been celebrity has been used specifically to promote limited, reactionary, and narrow views of politics. Potash's argument specifically was that in addition to that, celebrity and artists are used to promote the latest forms of drug use, which are meant to destabilize the community. So I don't know if that was part of their music. I don't gather that was kind of the music that they were performing, that this guy was performing. But the point is, because it looked like they did a lot of covers of a lot of popular Black world music. So maybe the point was just to put him in places around the world where, I don't know. I honestly don't know. The article, it would just all be speculation, but the point being that there is this political function to celebrity and music and artistry that is meant to convey much more than just entertainment or a good time. So I think it is interesting to note, obviously young people and young artists are always going to be riding trends, but they're also going to be well positioned to promote certain trends. And if the trend is an imposed substance or idea, then clearly artists are going to be in position to promote those ideas and encourage them among young people and others to be seen as acceptable and normal. Similarly, I guess to their point, it puts them in position to place people under good levels of surveillance. So anyway, I just thought that was a very interesting story. What I'm going to do is, just because time will be a little short for our next guest, what I'm going to do is share with you the other story that caught my attention that led me to reach out to our next guest, Professor Dana Williams. First of all, I encourage everybody, this is a great follow on Twitter Ella Septima Hamer. I've mentioned this person before on Dr. CBS's show. And they were pointing out that in a recent, I guess, communique from the federal government, anarchist violent extremists are the reason the cop who murdered George Floyd was made to stand on trial, was the point there. But why is that? Well, because according to this document, categories for domestic violent extremists, coming from Joe Biden's new anti-terrorism, I guess, task force. Domestic violent extremists are U.S.-based actors who conduct or threaten activities that are dangerous to human life in violation of the criminal laws of the United States or any state, appearing to be intended or to intimidate or coerce a civilian population and influence the policy of a government by intimidation or coercion, or affect the conduct of a government by mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping, as per the definition of domestic terrorism in 18 U.S. Code 2331, Section 5, mere advocacy or of political or social positions, political activism, use of strong rhetoric, or generalized philosophic embrace of violent tactics may not constitute violent extremism and may be constitutionally protected. While the majority of DVEs fall into one threat category, some draw upon or are inspired by ideological themes found in other threat categories. Mere advocacy of political or social positions, political activism, use of strong rhetoric, or generalized philosophic embrace of violent tactics may not constitute violent extremism and may be constitutionally protected. But specifically over here, well, first of all, racially or ethnically motivated violent extremists. We've DVEs, domestic violent extremists with ideological agendas derived from bias, often related to race or ethnicity, held by the actor against others, including a given population group. They also say animal rights, environmental violent extremists seeking to end or mitigate perceived cruelty, harm, or exploitation of animals, or perceived exploitation or destruction of natural resources. Abortion-related violent extremists with ideological agendas to support pro-life or pro-choice beliefs. That's interesting. Have there been pro-choice bombings? I might have missed those. I'd be interested to know. Have there been pro-choice assassinations of pro-lifers? I might have missed those, but it's always interesting how everybody's everybody. Anti-violent, but specifically here is they mention anarchist violent extremists who oppose all forms of capitalism, corporate globalism, and governing institutions which are perceived as harmful to society. I thought that was very interesting, which is why it's actually perfectly timed that our guest is just now showing up, because I wanted to talk more in general over time about anarchism and anarchy. I don't know as much about it as I need to. And I was in particular doing research on academia.edu looking for, which I do all the time, because so much is being produced, you can't keep up, and looking for work on anarchy, and particularly overlaps with Black radical movements, and came across the work of our next guest, who I'll introduce now, is Professor Dana Williams, who is a sociologist and Ph.D. from University of Akron, with teaching and research interests in social inequalities, class, gender, race, social movements, political sociology, complex organizations, research methods, and public sociology. Williams has authored various articles for peer-reviewed journals, including Race, Ethnicity, and Education, Teaching Sociology, Sociology of Sport Journal, Critical Sociology, Comparative Sociology, and Contemporary Justice Review. The book Anarchy and Society, Reflections on Anarchist Sociology was co-authored with Jeff Shantz in 2013, and Black Flags and Social Movements with Manchester University Press in 2017 are also recent monographs. And with that, I welcome Professor Williams to the show. Good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure to be here. Nice to see you, Jared.
So again, I appreciate you joining me and us, and I know we don't have that much time to get into all that your work entails, but talk with us, if you would, about maybe starting with this latest claim, this threat that Joe Biden's government is apparently acknowledging in the anarchist movement, and tell us, what is the anarchist movement? What is anarchy, and why is it still so terrifying?
Absolutely. First off, anarchy and anarchism are a thing that's been around for a long time. Folks have typically argued that it's a very consistent presence in the human experience ever since we can kind of discern. But in its modern manifestation, it probably goes back to the mid-19th century, back to some old European theorists like Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, who wrote a very famous article called "What is Property?" ? To which he answered, theft. And since then, there have been various iterations of people usually involved in sort of radical labor movements and other kind of liberation struggles throughout the world. And usually they distinguish between anarchism as an ideology, as a belief or kind of a praxis for working toward a liberatory world, and anarchy, which is sort of a state of non-oppression, of non-domination, of egalitarianism, of horizontal cooperation and so forth. So there's that ideology that people are kind of aiming for in the anarchist movement, and with the hope of aspiring to a state of anarchy, and not using the word state there in any kind of ironic way, just kind of an existence of egalitarianism and cooperation. And I think, again, I think people are referring to anarchism or anarchy as being a consistent part of the human experience, because probably most of human existence was lived in a fairly egalitarian existence. So, I mean, most human communities probably didn't have very sort of top-down or hierarchical violent leadership. In most cases, power was shared in a pretty egalitarian setting. Decisions were fairly democratically decided upon. Resources were shared and so forth. So it's really been just since the imposition of various hierarchies that's changed in probably the last 10,000 years or so, probably with the rise of modern agriculture, which came part and parcel with the rise of patriarchy and kind of this imposition of male domination and gendered relations and things like that. But as to why Joe Biden is talking about it again, well, he's talking about it again because it's a common thing that kind of lurks in and haunts the mind of leaders, I think. And it's an easy go-to scary kind of thing that people have been going to for the last century or so. And not only just in the United States, but throughout the world. The creation of Interpol, for instance, in Europe was as a consequence of an anti-anarchist conference that met to try to deal with the rise of anarchist and modern labor movements. The U.S. Secret Service was created as the result of an attempt upon the life and the eventual death of William McKinley, the President of the United States, by an avowed anarchist. Even the creation of the FBI by the notorious racist and right-winger J. Edgar Hoover was created. He basically made his bones, like his career was started by hunting anarchists, especially during World War I and the immediate aftermath of World War I. So it's a very common reference point and a very common point to scare people with. And Joe Biden, I think, is not necessarily any kind of unique person in that way. For me, as a sociologist who studies radical social movements, I tend to think about movements as networks of organizations and individuals who are somehow participating together, not often always on the same page, sometimes at odds with each other, but they're kind of working together in movement, in motion towards something. And every movement also has a corresponding anti-movement, a network that's opposed to their interests. Those are often governments or elite interests of various kinds. In the case of the anti-anarchist network, that includes educational institutions who are threatened by the idea of opposing hierarchy. It's obviously including law enforcement and other agents of the state. And it also includes the mass media too. So it's not a coincidence that when there was a huge upsurge last summer, 1 year ago, that the media, as opposed to dealing with fundamentally important issues and problems in America, go to the scary anarchist instead of dealing with the problem of rampant police violence, of centuries of racial injustice and white supremacy in the United States. Instead, they go to people burning buildings or people rioting in the streets. And of course, anarchists, as well as Black Lives Matter and all sorts of other people, get blamed for this. And the association between property destruction and violence is a very easy thing for the media to go to, and libeling kind of everyone with very broad brushstrokes. I think it makes better political hay for someone like Biden to blame anarchists as opposed to blaming Black Lives Matter. Although the previous president had no problem making that association and blaming both groups for it. In February,
well, he does include they do include in that document the race-based violent extremists. So they have that as part of the compendium of concerns. But there is still always this. Whenever we see these kinds of statements, there is always this box for anarchists, and admittedly, I haven't dealt with that much. So I'm only reading about anarchists in what's the word is it's like parallels to other histories. So if I'm reading about the labor movement, you'll hear about anarchists. If I'm reading about this other struggle, there's anarchists. So I did want to ask you about that a little bit. This what I'm calling a paralleling effect of anarchists to communism, anarchists to the labor movement, anarchists to whatever struggle. But so I mean, where are they in relationship to these struggles, and then what is it that sets them apart, and what is it that anarchists want? So like, what would the world look like if anarchists won, or if I know, I'm sure there's other versions, but if a version of anarchy won, what would it look like?
Yeah. Well, there's a joke inside anarchist movements that if you ask say a group of 3 anarchists what anarchism is, you'll probably get 3, but maybe 4 or 5 definitions of it. And of course, like any tradition, it's rich with different identities and ideologies and variants, and so forth. But that's probably not the most important thing to think about. The most important thing probably to think about is how that anarchists are part of a general tradition that go back again to the mid-1800s. And this is something I argued in my book that you mentioned, Black Flags and Social Movements. I called it Black Flags and Social Movements and not Black Flags in Social Movements, because there is an anarchist movement, but typically the way in which anarchist movements function is that they embed themselves in other movements and other struggles and other campaigns, issues, things going on in whatever society they're part of. There is a movement of anarchists who are very much focused on anarchist concerns, but they view their praxis, their goal, their daily actions as usually being involved in all sorts of just basic community struggles, typically. So it'll vary by city or state by state, country by country. Anarchists, like you said, have historically been very involved in labor movements. Some of that's been advocating on part of unions, but other anarchists being kind of skeptical of top-down or so-called big labor. One of the biggest and probably most influential anarchistic movements, labor organizations in the US was the Industrial Workers of the World, which still exists, sometimes called the Wobblies. It wasn't explicitly anarcho-syndicalist when it was created, but nowadays it pretty much is an anarcho-syndicalist organization. What that means for them is that workers should control their own means of production. They should self-manage their workplaces. They should engage in solidarity with fellow workers, even if they're not in the same workplace or even the same industry, and that they should take direct action to achieve this. And so one of the biggest points of advocacy is engaging in general strikes. So kind of doing everything to sort of seize power from capitalists and so forth. But for most anarchists, it's not necessarily just the labor movement. It's involved in all sorts of other things. And so ever since Ferguson, you've seen anarchists involved in the so-called Black Lives Matter movement of whenever police violence happens, police shootings happen, anarchists participate in various ways in those different places. So for example, here in Chico, where I live, there was a killing of a man a few years ago. Anarchists were involved in the struggle around that police shooting of this young Black man who was killed in his home by police. And I think it's a story that we can repeat in almost everywhere in the United States. struggles around immigration or immigrant rights, about protecting refugees. You see it in anti-violence against women movements. There's a whole strain of really rich, deep anarcha-feminist thought that dates back to some of the earliest founders of the anarchist tradition, including Emma Goldman, Valterine de Cleyre, Lucy Parsons, and so forth. And so if you're wondering kind of where all this culminates in for anarchists, is that they want to propel these struggles forward. They want to make sure that they're there, that they're present, that they can aid those movements in their goals, but also, to the extent possible, help those movements to be as anarchistic as possible, to make sure that they do have far-reaching and revolutionary aims. That, say, for the example of anarchists who are participating in Black Lives Matter, there's a certain portion of that movement who simply wants police to wear body cams. There's a certain portion of that movement that simply wants better accountability and maybe the prosecution of officers. There's another part of the movement, though, that wants to defund the police, and that also wants to sort of strike at the core of white supremacist domination in the United States. Anarchists, I think, probably want to encourage and help to support and propel that more radical impulse within that movement. At the end of the day, what anarchism looks like probably does vary by individual to individual or organization to organization, but they tend not to think about there being an ultimate goal. In fact, if anything, probably the goalpost gets moved again and again. In the same way that if you think about what radical Democrats argue, people who are kind of believers of democracy, I'm not saying like the Democratic Party, but people who believe in democracy, they often argue that it's like a non-ending thing, right? You can't sort of say at one point we've achieved democracy. Because as soon as you sort of believe that and you kind of give up on it, or you give up your vigilance, that, well, then someone comes in and they mess it up, or it corrodes, or it corrupts itself. So it's kind of like we have to kind of keep our eye on it, and we have to keep pushing forward. And anarchists tend to believe that as society improves and as things get better and as domination goes away, that we may discover other forms of domination, things that we never noticed before, things about our intimate relationships, things about new features that have kind of arisen in our lives, in our society. We also have to focus on those things too. So there's been a rise in recent decades on things like trans rights, on animal rights, other things that I think previous iterations of anarchist movements didn't really notice, in the same way that society didn't really care about as much too. So I think that anarchists have a constant sense of evolution in their analysis, and don't really think we're ever going to get to probably utopia, but would like a world that is horizontal in its relationships, that it's not like one group of people or one person dictates everything that happens, that power is shared equally somehow. And this could be through things like direct democracy, like every individual voting. It could be through some kind of consensus, but probably through some kind of decentralization that, well, there's decisions that affect me that don't necessarily affect you, so maybe I should be the ones to make them. And there's some way of kind of making those things work throughout the whole of society. We should strive to be anti-authoritarian in our orientations towards other people. And so not letting other people impose their will on other people in whatever way. Before, when you mentioned like inequality, that I study things like class, gender, and race, that there's a variety of ways in which that stuff works, that society creates institutions that oppress people in different ways, and anarchists believe that those things should be fought and dismantled. And it's not like, you know, the things that we do are going to go away, or, you know, like the things that gender relies upon. It's not like labor that is now divvied up by gender is going to cease to be done. Or with capitalism, it's not like in an anarchist society there will be no economic activity. People will still have to make things and consume things. The anarchist, I guess, desire or goal is that those things are done in anti-authoritarian ways, egalitarian ways, cooperative ways, as opposed to using coercion and domination and exploitation.
Is there, forgive me putting you on the spot, but is there who is making or where can I go to find or a loud, strong argument coming out of the anarchist community for the general strike now? I'm very much interested. Yeah, I'm very much interested in a general strike, like now, like today. Who is there anybody putting that argument together that I can go find, or have you put it together somewhere, you know, that's saying right now, like, this is why an anarchist analysis and an argument around a general strike would be good, because the more I think about it, I try to find tactics to advocate beyond voting or self improvement or join an organization. I very much like the idea of a general strike. Yeah. And by the way, very much aware of Brother Irvin, and we've actually covered some of his work here already, and we'll look to do more of that. Maybe that's your answer. I don't know.
I mean, Lorenzo's been a very strong advocate ever since the 1960s, and ever since he sort of became an anarchist. So if people didn't get the reference, I think on the screen you had Lorenzo Kumboya Irvin. There's a kind of a whole cadre of people who, most of whom are like former Panthers, but after a period of incarceration, many of them kind of came to critique what they saw as some of the more top-down aspects of party leadership in the Panthers, especially coming out of Oakland, and kind of came to an anarchist analysis, sometimes independently of each other. And a number of them have written about it, including Lorenzo is one of the more prominent voices there. As far as other sort of non-black anarchist voices, there, of course, the Industrial Workers of the World continues to organize today. It still exists, and actually, like other unions, it represents workers in many different industries in the U.S.
And we do have an interview with an IWW rep not that long ago. People should check that out. I'm forgetting his name off the top of my head. Apologies, but I don't remember him. Are they actually advocating for a general strike now, or are they just organizing more? Is anybody? That's what I'm at. Like, is anybody calling for it and saying this is why right now we should be doing it?
I don't know for an active call right now. There were active calls last summer related to the stuff related to George Floyd. I think there were also things that kind of dovetailed with the more radical sectors of the labor movement leading up to the last election, assuming that Trump would try to steal it. That anarchists supported, not necessarily because they supported electoralism, but because they opposed the fascism that Trump is and represents. Some of the groups that I think have been most actively involved in some of this stuff, especially on local levels, would be like there's a pretty broad network that's called the Black Rose Federation. Black is this color that, in this case, has nothing to do with race. Black is typically a kind of a color associated with anarchist movements for some random historical reasons. The Black Rose Federation exists in a lot of different cities, and they identify as anarcho-communists. So there's kind of a close affinity for the ideals of communist society, but using anarchist methods and techniques to get there. They've actively advocated for things like that before. But as of right now, I don't know of any group actively advocating for that. But to be honest, I think anarchists typically would support that at the drop of a hat. It's very much part of the anarchist tradition. One of the very first sort of notable cases of a general strike in the U.S. is in 1882 with what culminated in what we call the Haymarket Affair today, or the Haymarket Martyrs, of the idea that mostly immigrants in the city of Chicago wanted to oppose the really dire conditions there and advocate for an 8-hour day. And so they got tens of thousands of workers basically to lay down their tools, not go to work, and engaged in rallies, blockades, street marches and stuff, and also fighting with cops for a number of days until there was a police shooting that resulted in the arrest of 8 anarchists and the hanging of 4 of them, which led to the modern Labor Day that we recognize, at least throughout the world, not in the U.S. anymore. We have a special Labor Day, but May Day is traditionally that day. That
I was going to say, everybody but here. Yeah. But here and now, unfortunately, no. But I mean, I think anarchists are in some ways, like a lot of movements, are opportunistic to the times. So it made sense during the culmination of last summer that with all that energy, all that activism, all those people in the streets doing things and organizing stuff, that anarchists, and also, to be honest, lots of people realized there was a point in calling for a general strike. And it didn't result, I think, in what people wanted it to, but it was pretty impressive for what it did pull off, I think, at the time. It definitely turned the heads of a lot of people. When you've mentioned within and unfortunately I have to wrap in 10 minutes. This is my fault with the scheduling and my own life schedule. But anyway, but you mentioned that there's a movement within within anarchist studies or politics. There was an anarchist feminist movement. But you also talk about in your work, you deal a lot with race and class and gender issues. So that anarchist feminist component, I guess, notwithstanding, what else? I know there are Black anarchists. How is the anarchist movement dealing with those traditional struggles of race, class, and gender within its own ranks, so to speak?
Sure. If you do go back to the mid-1800s, the kind of original kind of core demands, or you could maybe say as oppositions, the things that anarchists were most concerned about were things that were dominant in European societies at the time. So that was the growing and solidification of the nation state, the rise of industrial capitalism, and kind of the residual social and cultural moral power of centralized religion. Now, those three things are still around, but I think the kind of opposition to religion has fallen away a little bit. And it's not to say that there isn't religious fundamentalism or that there aren't harms associated with that sometimes, but state and capitalism continue to be kind of a core focus of anarchism. But as those movements and those societies changed, of course, a gender analysis came in very early, as soon as women were involved, and some early men too, although to be totally honest, lots of early anarchist men, like early socialist men and early communist men and so forth, were also sexist too. But there was that early impetus to study that. In other countries, including racially diverse countries like the United States, race was a little bit slow to gain traction, but it definitely did in the early 20th century. The biggest place, though, that we see a rise in this is in the movements of the 60s. Maybe the most ideal and best consequence of that is probably the Black anarchism that we mentioned a minute ago, that it really laid down a challenge to a predominantly white movement at the time to think critically about how it felt about the demands of the civil rights movement at the time, how it felt about the new Black Power movement that had been arising in the late 60s. Anarchists had been involved in civil rights from an early period in the 50s. There were journals, there were anarcho-pacifists, there were a variety of different organizations, including radical labor and anarcho-syndicalists who participated in the early civil rights movement, as well as through the Black Power movement. But very few kind of made that their key focus. But now, ever since the movements of the 60s, race and the opposition to white supremacy has been a core demand, amongst others, but it's been a core demand of it. Ever since the late 90s and early 2000s, there's been more of a concerted effort amongst anarchists, particularly younger anarchists, to try to create organizing spaces for people of color in those movements. In fact, it gave a rise to a network called Anarchist People of Color, or APOC. They held a number of national conferences in which people, mostly Black, Latinx, and Asian and Pacific Islander folks, came together in conferences in sort of non-white spaces to organize, talk about not only the struggle against white supremacy, but also what it meant to be a person of color within a predominantly white movement. And I think those were pretty positive developments. And in many places in the United States, not only have, I think, the anarchist movements become less white, but in some places they're totally dominated by people of color. So, for example, in Los Angeles, like the city itself, which is a very diverse city, the presence of white anarchists is very small and negligible to the presence of, say, Latinx and Black anarchists. So I think the movement has changed in part because people have tried to get all of its members to see the rationale of that, to develop a strong race analysis, but also because the society around it's changed too. That anarchist people of color have been empowered, in part through the work like people of Lorenza Comboy Irwin and other Black anarchists, to write, to organize, to create spaces for that kind of stuff to happen over time. Other people who maybe some of your listeners are interested in would be the well-known Puerto Rican Black anarchist Martin Sostre from New York, or the former BLA prisoner Kouassi Balagoon, who was arrested in the Brinks robbery in the 80s, along with David Gilbert and other people, in their attempt to expropriate funds for Black liberation struggles. There's been some other people too, including Ashante Alston, who's still a very active anarchist. He's been involved in the Institute for Anarchist Studies and Zapatista solidarity stuff and so forth over the years.
I think he was he's either on his way to the platform or we're trying to, I mean, we've been, Ashanti should be around sooner than later, but anyway.
He's got a zine that he's written for years called Anarchist Panther, which is pretty great. In fact, I almost debated wearing my Anarchist Panther shirt today. And then another
opportunity.
Sorry, I want to rep for Ashanti though. Anyway, and other people like Ahura Lutalo, and there's a long list of those people who again went through a period of development from being, at least in the, I mean, maybe not in the case of Martin Sostre, but most of them were Black Panthers. About half of them were BLA members, and they go to prison and they start encountering anarchist literature, other anarchists. A few of them actually turn anarchism on with each other a bit, and they emerge and they call themselves different things. Like, I mean, again, Ashanti calls himself an Anarchist Panther. For Kouassi Balagoon, it's he's an African anarchist, or identified as an African anarchist. And in the case of Lorenzo, he very much strongly identifies with Black anarchism. Unfortunately, Lorenzo's kind of had some health crises lately, I think. It's been kind of more difficult for him to be actively involved in the movement. In the case of Kouassi Balagoon, he died in prison. He contracted AIDS and died very prematurely young. But he was developing a very strong voice in prison. I mean, I wrote to David Gilbert about this a number of years ago, that he was very active, in fact, corresponding with the predominantly white anarchist movement about issues of race. And it was also very active in trying to position a queer analysis. He identified as bisexual, kind of a queer analysis within the anarchist movement too at the time. So some really important kind of influential people, many of whom wrote lots of stuff. There's some, for people who are interested in anarchist ideas, there's lots of anarchist archives online. Probably one of the biggest ones would be a group called the Anarchist Library that you can find online that has thousands and thousands of writings, including very modern ones, as well as old ones going back to, you know, a previous century, if you like. But and you could find a lot of Black anarchist writings there, as well as other ones that deal with race too, if you search for it. Other places that people might find news, if they're interested kind of in an anarchist analysis, would be there's a group that puts together a website that collates news called itsgoingdown.org, and it covers all sorts of community struggles, anti-fascist struggles, and it even if it's not always about anarchist stuff specifically, it's from an anarchist analysis. So people may enjoy that, and it also kind of connects a lot of different anarchist media. There's anarchist podcasts, anarchist newspapers, magazines, and things like that that also are kind of collated there too. So there's lots of places that people can find some of these ideas if they're interested.
Listen, Professor Williams, thank you very much for joining us, especially on such short notice. And I really appreciate you coming through and breaking this down as quickly as you could. Thank you. Take care. We'll catch you another time for more. Appreciate you.
Absolutely. Take care. Bye.
All right. Thank you. All right, everybody. Unfortunately, I got to run. It's been a great morning. Please trying to hold it down for the Remix Morning Show crew, where we will reconvene tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. Eastern, and the rest of the week through Thursday. I'll be back on Friday with the BPM crew and Brother Kaba for our special interview discussion with Dr. Cornell West. So please come back for that as well. Please check out the rest of the site. All kinds of good stuff at the BPM channel, blackpowermedia.org as well. If I didn't get to it, I will be checking the comments later. So please continue, as my man Pierre at Comedy Hype says.
Put it in the comments.
And we'll catch you next time here at I Mix What I Like Live and Black Power Media. Thanks again, everybody. Like Fred Hampton used to say, we say peace if you're willing to fight for it. So peace, everybody. Catch you tomorrow morning. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.